The square was buzzing with tourists, cameras flashing and laughter echoing against the palace walls. Among the crowd stood Marcus, a black belt in karate, a man who had spent years training his body and mind in discipline and strength. He wasn't a troublemaker by nature. In fact, he often taught his students about respect, humility, and restraint. But that day, something in him snapped, and what he did would change his life forever. It started as a joke. His friends dared him to test his courage in front of the royal guards, the men in immaculate uniforms who stood like statues, guarding the palace with unwavering discipline. Everyone knew the rule: you don't touch the guards. They're trained not only to stand still, but also to defend the crown with their lives. Marcus, full of bravado, thought he could bend that rule just for a laugh. "Come on, Marcus," one of his friends whispered. "You're a black belt. Show us that discipline of yours." But their smirks and laughter only pushed him closer to the line he should never have crossed. The guard stood tall, his jaw firm, his eyes unflinching. Marcus stepped closer, waving his hand in front of the soldier's face. The guard didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even acknowledge his existence. The crowd chuckled nervously, some pulling out phones to record. That was when Marcus, in a reckless burst of pride, raised his hand and slapped the guard across the cheek. The sound cracked like thunder in the quiet square. Gasps erupted. For a split second, Marcus grinned, thinking he'd broken through the guard's iron discipline. But what happened next wiped that smile from his face. The guard's eyes shifted, cold as steel, locking onto Marcus. In a swift, disciplined motion, he stepped forward, his presence towering, his authority suffocating. Marcus froze. His friends stopped laughing. The atmosphere shifted from playful to deadly serious. This wasn't a game anymore. The guard's voice cut through the air, low and commanding. "On your knees." Marcus's pride collapsed in an instant. His heart pounded against his chest as he realized the weight of his mistake. The tourists who had been laughing a moment ago now stared in stunned silence. Cameras lowered. This wasn't the show they expected. It was a warning, a demonstration of the power and consequence hidden behind the ceremonial uniform. Marcus tried to laugh it off, stammering something about a harmless joke, but the guard didn't flinch. His hand moved subtly to the hilt of his ceremonial weapon, and in that moment Marcus saw something he'd never seen before. True authority, the kind that could humble even a black belt. His knees buckled, his hands shook. He dropped to the ground without being touched, not out of obedience, but out of fear. The man who had slapped a royal guard, a master of martial arts, now knelt in front of him, begging for forgiveness, begging to avoid the consequences that could ruin his life. And as Marcus's voice cracked with desperation, he realized that strength wasn't about fists or belts. It was about knowing when to stop, when to respect a line you cannot cross. But the guard wasn't finished yet. What followed would leave Marcus and everyone watching that day with a lesson they would never forget. The square had gone quiet. Even the murmurs of the crowd felt like distant echoes compared to the pounding of Marcus's own heartbeat. Kneeling on the cold stone, he could feel every eye on him, every judgment silently weighing him down. Tourists, passers-by, and even his friends looked on in shock, unsure whether to laugh, gasp, or run. The royal guard remained perfectly still, his hand resting lightly on the ceremonial hilt of his sword. Not enough to draw it, not yet, but enough to remind Marcus of what real power looked like. The guard's eyes cold, unyielding, and piercing locked onto Marcus, reading him like an open book. "Do you understand the rules of this palace?" the guard asked, his voice calm but heavy with authority. "Yes," Marcus stammered, the word trembling out of his mouth. I was wrong, please." "I didn't mean," the guard raised a single eyebrow, his gaze unmoving. "Wrong doesn't even begin to cover it. You struck a man who serves the crown, and you did so publicly in front of witnesses. Pride and arrogance are dangerous things, Marcus." Marcus swallowed hard, shame washing over him. He was a black belt, a master of discipline, they had called him. But nothing in his years of training had prepared him for this. His fists, once so precise and strong, felt useless. His confidence, once unshakable, was in pieces on the cold stone beneath him. Then came the first twist. A second guard appeared silently, stepping into the crowd without a sound. His eyes were fixed on Marcus, and Marcus noticed the subtle nod from the first guard. The presence of another soldier doubled the pressure, a silent reminder that this wasn't about punishment alone, it was about sending a message. "You will stay here," the first guard said, his voice sharp now, carrying across the square, "until the crown decides what is to be done with you." The words hit Marcus like a punch. He looked around for his friends. They had backed away, some shaking their heads in disbelief, some whispering frantic apologies. None of them could help him now, but he was entirely alone. Time stretched painfully. Each second felt like a minute. Marcus's mind raced, thinking of every possible outcome. A fine, public humiliation. Being banned from the palace grounds forever, or worse, imprisonment. His black belt, his years of mastery, all felt meaningless compared to the weight of authority in front of him. As the minutes dragged on, a crowd started to form tourists who had been recording. Locals who had heard the commotion, palace staff curious about the unfolding situation. Whispers spread through the crowd. Did he really slap a royal guard? He's begging now. The humiliation wasn't just personal anymore. It was public. Then came another twist, one that Marcus hadn't anticipated at all. The guard knelt slightly, his massive hand resting on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture that seemed both intimidating and oddly reassuring. "You have skill, Marcus," he said. "I can see it in your posture, your focus, your precision. But skill without wisdom is dangerous. Pride without caution can destroy you. Today, you've learned a lesson that no dojo could ever teach." Marcus's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the words caught in his throat. He realized he had been reckless, not just with the guard, but with his own understanding of power and respect. A hush fell over the square as the guard straightened, signaling to the second guard. Together, they escorted Marcus to a small pavilion off to the side. The whispers of the crowd followed him like shadows, heavy and judgmental. Inside, the guard spoke again. "You will remain here under watch, not as punishment, but as a test. A man's true character is revealed not through victories, but through how he responds to his mistakes. Reflect on your actions, Marcus. Learn from them." Marcus nodded, swallowing back a lump in his throat. He felt every ounce of pride and arrogance drained from him. This wasn't about physical strength anymore. This was about humility, accountability, and the hard reality that one reckless moment could undo everything he had worked for. Hours passed in silence. Marcus thought about every decision that had led him here. The slap, the dare, the laughter, it all seemed trivial now, yet the consequences were immense. He thought of the black belt, the skill, the power, but none of it meant anything without respect and judgment. As night fell and the square emptied, Marcus understood that the true lesson of the day wasn't about the guards. It was about himself. He had been strong, yes, but he had been foolish. He had pride, but no wisdom. And in that cold pavilion, he finally realized what it truly meant to beg for his life, not in fear of death, but in recognition of the power of responsibility, restraint, and respect. The pavilion was dimly lit, the walls echoing with Marcus's shallow breaths. Each tick of the clock sounded like a drum of impending judgment. The hum of the palace beyond the walls felt distant, almost unreal. He sat on a simple wooden bench, hands trembling, still feeling the sting of shame from the public humiliation. Hours had passed since the slap. Marcus's black belt, once a symbol of mastery and pride, now felt like a fragile veneer. His body, trained for combat and precision, had betrayed him in the arena that mattered most: respect. He had underestimated authority, underestimated consequences, and underestimated the sharpness of his own ego. Suddenly, the door creaked. Marcus's heart leaped into his throat. A guard entered, not the one he had slapped, but the second one who had stood silently in the square. In his hand was a small scroll, sealed with a wax insignia Marcus didn't recognize. "This is from the crown," the guard said, his voice unreadable. Marcus took it carefully. Marcus took it with shaking hands, breaking the seal. The words inside sent a shiver down his spine. "You have demonstrated skill without wisdom. You've shown arrogance in public and caused distress among the palace guards. You are hereby summoned to atone for your actions before the royal council. Failure to comply will result in severe consequences, including permanent exile from palace grounds and forfeiture of privileges granted to you as a visitor. Exile, privileges revoked, permanent disgrace." Every word felt like a hammer striking him again and again. He realized this wasn't just about humiliation. It was about stripping him of identity, of honor, of dignity. As he sat there, the door opened again. This time the guard who had been slapped entered. Marcus instinctively flinched, expecting anger or violence. Instead, the man's expression was unreadable, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made Marcus shrink back. "Stand," the guard commanded. Marcus obeyed, knees trembling. "You have talent," the guard said. "But talent alone is meaningless without control. Strength alone is meaningless without respect. You were given discipline, yet you chose chaos. Today you will learn the price of your actions, not through fists, but through humility." He gestured to the door. Marcus followed, stepping into the night, past the empty square where earlier laughter had turned into silence. He could feel the weight of every eye that had witnessed his disgrace. Then came the twist Marcus hadn't seen coming. The guards didn't march him off to a private cell, nor did they leave him exposed to public humiliation. Instead, they escorted him to a secluded training hall deep within the palace grounds. The door closed behind him with a heavy thud, leaving him alone with the first guard. "This is your trial," the guard said. "It's not against me, but against yourself. You will demonstrate restraint, respect, and control. Only then will you be granted the crown's forgiveness." Marcus's chest tightened. A trial against himself? He had trained for years to master his body, but now he realized he had never trained his ego. The fear, the shame, the humiliation, all were tests of character, not strength. Over the next several hours, Marcus was forced through exercises designed not to test his skill, but his humility. Every movement he executed was corrected. Every misstep admonished not for failure, but for pride. The guard's eyes never left him, and Marcus felt the weight of judgment heavier than any physical blow he had ever endured. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the guard stepped back. Marcus, drenched in sweat, trembling from exertion and fear, looked up to see a nod of acknowledgement. "You have begun to understand," the guard said. "Strength is nothing without humility. Skill is nothing without respect. Today, you begged for your life, not with words, but with actions. Remember this lesson. Do not repeat it." Marcus sank to his knees, tears of relief and understanding streaming down his face. He had survived not because of his strength, but because he had learned the true meaning of respect and accountability. As the guard escorted him back to the palace exit, Marcus realized that this day would stay with him forever, not as a story of embarrassment, but as a story of transformation, a moment where ego met authority and humility prevailed. By the time he stepped back into the square, night had fallen. The city lights glimmered, and the crowds had dispersed. Marcus looked at the palace walls, a mix of reverence and understanding washing over him. He had been humbled, tested, and ultimately spared, and he knew that the lessons learned here would shape every step he took forward. The square was empty now, lit only by the soft glow of lanterns. Marcus stepped out of the palace gates, feeling the cool night air against his sweat-drenched skin. The humiliation of the day still weighed on him, but it was no longer a burden, it was a lesson carved deep into his soul. He walked slowly, each step heavy with reflection. The slap that had seemed so insignificant earlier had nearly cost him everything: pride, respect, and the possibility of ever returning to the palace grounds. But now he understood something far more important than any victory or title his black belt had ever brought him. True strength comes from knowing when to control yourself, when to pause, and when to show respect even to those you might underestimate. As he reached the quiet edge of the square, he paused and looked back at the palace. Its towering walls glimmered under the night sky, a silent reminder of the power and authority that existed beyond individual skill or ego. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude, not just for being spared, but for being given the chance to learn this lesson. The crowd that had witnessed his humiliation had long gone, but their memory remained. Marcus realized that what had begun as a reckless act in front of strangers had become an opportunity to demonstrate growth. His friends, who had laughed and dared him at the start, would never forget what had happened either. He thought of the guard, the man he had slapped. Initially a figure of intimidation, he had become an unexpected mentor. Through discipline and measured guidance, the guard had forced Marcus to confront his own flaws. Marcus bowed his head, silently offering respect to the man who had not only demanded accountability, but also provided a path to redemption. In the following days, Marcus returned to his training not just for skill, but for character. Every punch, every kick, every form was executed with a newfound awareness. Each movement carried humility. Each strike carried respect. The black belt he had earned was no longer a symbol of pride. It was a symbol of responsibility. News of the incident spread quietly, whispered among those who visited the palace. Some mocked him, some sympathized, but most were intrigued by the story of a black belt who had dared to challenge authority, and ended up learning a lesson that only a few ever truly understood. Marcus didn't care about the whispers. What mattered was the transformation within himself. He also spent time reflecting on what it meant to truly respect others, regardless of their position, power, or demeanor. That day had taught him that ego and skill, no matter how refined, could never substitute for wisdom. The palace guards, the institution, and the rules they upheld were far larger than any single individual. Recognizing that was the first step toward real mastery, not just of martial arts, but of life itself. Marcus never forgot the moment he begged not, with words, but with his actions for forgiveness. It was a humbling, terrifying, and ultimately enlightening experience. He realized that life would always present situations that tested not his strength, but his character. And in those moments, humility would always be the key to surviving and thriving. Looking back, Marcus understood something profound. The slap was not the mistake. The mistake was pride, untempered by wisdom. The lesson was not pain, but awareness. And the reward was a deeper understanding of what it meant to be truly strong. As he left the palace grounds one last time, Marcus took a deep breath, feeling a sense of clarity he had never experienced before. The echoes of the day would stay with him forever, guiding his choices, his teaching, and his interactions with others. Strength could no longer be measured by how hard he hit or how fast he moved. It was measured by the restraint he showed, the respect he gave, and the wisdom he carried forward. And to anyone watching this story now, remember this: moments of recklessness, pride, or challenge are not just tests. They are opportunities to grow. True strength lies not in domination or aggression, but in the courage to admit mistakes, to learn from them, and to act with humility. If this story moved you, share it. Reflect on it. Let it remind you that respect and humility are as powerful, if not more, than any skill or strength you possess. Because sometimes, the hardest battles aren't fought with fists, they're fought within ourselves.